Hi, I'm Dr. Shiloh.
And I'm Dr. Scott.
And this is LA Not So Confidential, the forensic psychology and true crime podcast.
Each week, we explore the intersection of psychology, the criminal justice system, and entertainment.
Today, our episode is a true crime documentary review on Am Vanessa Guillen. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. End of the month. It's March. Stick around.
It's a big deal.
Stick around to the end of this episode to hear more. But yeah, it's a spring break in my household. So we're going to go take a little local vacay. And then, I don't know, it's off and running with more travel after that for us for a little bit.
Yeah, we got
doing anything? Are you going anywhere soon?
Yeah, I am going back south in a couple of weeks for almost 2 weeks.
Yes.
It is. You know, all of my unbelievable nieces and nephews are expanding their families. And I want to, when they're on the other side of the country, I really want to make sure that I'm there for some moments. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Send some videos. Those cute little kiddos. Yeah, well, let's jump into it after doing our episode recap for next week.
Cool. So last week, episode 180 was a review of a vintage case entitled The Zoot Suit Riots. We explored a number of events that led up to this history-making event entitled the Zoot Suit Riots here in Southern California. And despite that riot receiving far less attention than deserved in the annals of civil rights struggles within the U.S., they did represent a very pivotal moment here in Los Angeles and national history. Dr. Shiloh and I discuss how the media really played conflicting sides of the event and aggravated tensions by demonizing the Latino community. And this event really was a seminal moment in history that eventually led to illuminating and uncovering the pervasive racism and marginalization perpetrated by media, industry, and law enforcement at that time in Southern California.
Yep. So glad we covered that one. And thanks to Lauren, Patreon member, for suggesting that.
Oh, absolutely.
So do we have time to watch or listen or read lately? Let's cover what we're doing. So I finished Love is Blind. Very underwhelmed. If you guys tuned in to our last shrink wrap, we talked about that. Scott grilled me as to why I watch it.
I mean, I have things that other people would consider strange that I'm into. So I should be more patient, but I think they just make those reality shows make me really sad.
Yeah, so. I know. No. I was happy to explore that with you. Certainly. So we actually just finished all the seasons last night. A few months ago when my dad was here, we started watching Tacoma FD while we were just like eating dinner, which is the same group of guys that did Super Troopers and some other hilarious comedies. It's just like, for a comedy, it's really good. It's one that's done really well. The characters are so great. And it's about firefighters that are just like idiots. And it's nice to not watch one about cops for once.
Yeah. It's a little bit like Reno 911. I think they're emulating that, which I think it needs a little bit to get its legs, but there's some really funny moments.
There are. And of course, I text my brother, who's a firefighter, the one firefighter in my law enforcement family. And I'm like, hey, do you guys watch this? And he's like, do you guys watch Reno 911? And I'm like, I know, but there's not a lot of firefighter shows out there, and it's good. And, he does some screenwriting on the side. So I'm like, you should check it out.
What do you mean? You don't watch 911?
No.
That show. Oh my God.
I actually tried. And then there was one of those scenes where the police psychologist is banging the cop, like when he comes in for his debriefing. And I'm just like, okay, I'm done. Actually, I think I wrote a tweet, a very angry tweet, but I'm sure they really took it up to the higher ups. I'm also trying, you go on Netflix and it's like, continue this for Shiloh. I'm trying to go back and get through Orange is the New Black. Like every time I'm folding laundry or something, I'll put it on. And I'm in season 5 where it's the prison riot, and it's the longest fucking season of television ever. I'm just like trying to get through it, but I'm also someone who's realized you don't have to. I don't know if I just want closure because it was so strong back in the day.
That's really interesting. And all humor aside, we have parasocial relationships with these characters, not only podcasters and their audiences, but we have parasocial relationships with characters in these things. And well, I know what is problematic is when something is so captivating and well written initially, and then it gets to the point where they're out of ideas or there's something going on behind the scenes. And as an audience, you are invested in that relationship with the show. And it was the same thing with me in Walking Dead and Game of Thrones. And I finally, and what's his name? Morgan, something Morgan.
Oh, yeah.
That played Negan on Walking Dead. He's a wonderful man. He's supposed to be really great. He's a great actor. And that character made no sense, was needlessly violent, just made no sense. Fuck this show. Like, I don't need to be, the few characters that I care about keep getting killed. So I don't care about that anymore.
Yeah. Well, when that happens, certainly. Yeah. Anyway, I'm not really listening to anything new on like the podcast front, just the normal stuff that I'm following. But I am reading Helltown by Casey Sherman. So that's the author that wrote the book that we talked about, the new book on the Lana Turner story. Okay. So this is one of his previous books, but it's about a serial killer in the Cape Cod area that was happening around the same time as the Manson murders and has some sort of like hippie, druggy similarities. Okay. But the guy was actually like doing the killing himself. So it's good. I'm listening to audio and I'm enjoying it. So I'll probably pick up Casey Sherman's other book on Lana Turner next. What about you?
Well, first of all, I don't know what kind of drugs you're on because I don't know how you're watching and doing all this stuff because I'm barely.
And I sleep 8 hours a night very well. So
okay, I don't get it. You probably don't go into like sort of fugue states like I do when I.
No, I don't have time for that.
Yeah. So we're on season 2 of Succession. Weird, darkly funny. But I'll have to say, I don't know if I'm going to make it through the whole thing because all the characters are so horrible. There's just like knowing that there's probably about 90% truth to how, these, the top of the 1% live and work is just kind of gross, but it's interesting, certainly. So I'll see what happens. Palm Royale, we just started, which is really interesting. That's the Kristen Wiig miniseries that's supposed to be a drama, but it's comic because she's doing, all of them are doing these sort of over the top characters from 1969. Great cast, unbelievable production design for everything is Florida mid-century modern with this tropical vibe and over the top houses from that time, and the clothing is fantastic.
I just want to watch it for the clothing.
Yeah, it's worth it. It's a good story and everybody's really good in it. And they're de-aging on Ricky Martin and Laura Dern, who I think may be slightly older than their character is supposed to be. Yeah. They're doing this digital de-aging that is really convincing. Like, it's like, wow, that shit works. Unless they both had great work, which is possible. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then catching up on podcasts, our good friends at Unexplained Oregon. Love that. Catching up with them. And then also Conspirituality. They're just smart people. They're just really smart, thoughtful people. And they have an episode that I think is so fascinating. They have on the author of a book about the food that is used in various cults and the purpose it serves. And she researches the shit out of this. It's fascinating.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow. That is so cool.
Oh, yeah. They talk about, and one of them is a former Hare Krishna. So he talks about, when you go to the buffet, you're getting all of this phenomenal, like the top of the line vegan food with tons of fat in it and tons of spices, that's just like this overwhelming sensory experience. But on the other side, when you're working in the kitchens, you're eating none of that because their belief system doesn't want you to have protein and doesn't want you to have a bunch of spice. Because, and this is something that she points out as the author, is that many of the restrictive diets and cults really severely reduce the amount of protein. And when you're protein starved, you're kind of dissociating a lot.
Your brain starved.
Your brain is starving. You can't concentrate. So maybe you don't put up a fight or have interesting insights about what you're doing. So
the last one of theirs that you sent me that I listened to was the one about coaches,
Oh my
like
God.
coaches who do coaching on coaching.
Yeah.
I'm like, what the fuck?
And the
It's
clips that
wild.
they use, the clips of the
I
women of,
know.
I'm going to take you to the next level, and all it's going to cost is $25,000 because you want to get out there and you want to manifest. Like,
It's
oh my,
normally $75,000, but I'm
right.
like, who are these people?
Yeah.
What in like they say, it can't, it's not sustainable. It's like an MLM and you're just
Right.
coaching people to be coaches. And it's
And
so
some of them are
stupid.
grifters. I think some of them are grifters, and some of them have pretty clear hypomanic type
Yeah,
qualities. There's some
sure.
narcissism, there's some hypomania going on about the way they're selling it. I mean, it's very, very
Yeah.
culty. But
Yeah. Good stuff.
let's move on to our show.
Yeah. And I apologize if my sound is off today. So I'm redoing my little podcast area and realized that my husband and I took down the hooks for my sound curtains to go behind me because we're expanding it. So if it sounds different or off, that's why. I'll get my stuff together when we come back.
It sounds fine from here.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. All right. So I Am Vanessa Guillen is a 2022 Netflix original directed by Christy Wegener. It tells a horrific story of a young US soldier who was brutally murdered at Fort Hood military base by another soldier. Having endured what appeared to be several accounts of sexual harassment before her murder, Vanessa's family are determined to reveal the truth and taking their case all the way to Congress. So this has a Rotten Tomatoes score, an audience score of 75%. And with that, why don't we start by just laying out how this one is stylized, what we think about the production, and then we'll get into the story.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed. It's not so much talking about ratings at this point, but I was really impressed. It's a very straightforward story. You already know going in, unfortunately, that Vanessa is the victim of a violent crime. There's pretty much, if you're into true crime, you wouldn't not know about this story.
Right.
But what's fascinating is that it's very clear through the retelling of this that the military would have loved to completely covered up this, because the entire timeline from beginning to end of the crime itself and the search was relatively short. So it's a pretty much open, closed case within a few months, but a really vital part of the story that takes up about a third. The last third, or maybe the last quarter of the documentary, comes after the family says goodbye to their very beloved daughter and sister. And it goes on to weigh heavily on the aftermath of what the family does to really have an effect on the military long term. It's a very big deal. And the narrative weighs a lot heavily on family interviews, news reports, and highlighting kind of directly that there's no information coming from Fort Hood representatives. Yeah. Fort Hood plays the major role as being something that has been a powder keg for years. And I love how this is edited, and I love how the family is presented. I don't think that they're exploited. It feels like they're not exploited. It's like they're being treated with so much respect, even their challenges. The mom is, of course, just pretty destroyed by this. And I think that they're very respectful of her, which is important.
Yeah, I agree. It feels like they were in control. And as we'll talk about this group of very strong women, certainly I don't think they would let this documentary be done any other way, but you certainly get a very candid view of them as well. So yes, I mean, it sounds pretty cookie cutter for a true crime documentary, right? You have the interviews, mostly the mom, the sisters, Myra and Lupe, and then some good friends from the army, one of Vanessa's soccer friends. Her fiance Juan is in it a little bit. He doesn't speak too much to camera. And then you have some other people like journalists, attorneys, some military policy experts, other women who have experienced sexual assault in the military. And I feel like everyone like perfectly contributed to this. There, how sometimes we're like, why was that person in this? Or why are they talking? It feels salacious, or they really said nothing. I feel like everyone they brought in fit a really good purpose. And you weren't thinking about the style of the production because everything just flowed really well. So I thought that was done nicely. And I'm glad we heard from the people we heard from.
Right.
So the documentary begins by introducing Vanessa, a young woman with dreams of serving her country and making her family proud. She wanted to be in the Army. Her mom said from age 10, basically, she's, I'm going to be an astronaut or I'm going to go into the Army, which is adorable. And her mom's, you better be an astronaut.
Yeah. Mom did not want her to go into the Army. Yeah.
No, no. And they even, her mom recounts when she was of age and telling her that she already enlisted. And didn't it feel like one of those commercials, those recruitment commercials for the military, where the child is telling their family and like that they're going to be okay? And I felt like it was that coming to life. It was really, really powerful. So Vanessa's family members, including her mother, Gloria, and her sisters, share a lot of their memories of Vanessa and describe her as kind, hardworking, and ambitious. Definitely this woman had a big heart, but she was also a take no shit kind of person and knew what her goals were and certainly went after them. Her mother is talking a lot, and it's all in Spanish. They're a Mexican American family, and it's still like that. Even that didn't take away from the documentary at all. Like it flowed very well in hearing mom speak in the way in which she was comfortable speaking. But I have to say, just from the montage opening of this documentary before they actually get into it, was hugely emotional for me. I mean, I was getting like all the feels, and I had followed this story pretty closely. And I had a friend at the time who's a veteran, and she actually started a podcast and had me interviewed on it around the time that this then started happening. And I just started seeing like women in my life that could have been Vanessa, which totally speaks to the I Am Vanessa Guillen hashtag, right? And I think I was also thinking of a lot of my clients working in law enforcement, and in Los Angeles, so many Latina and Hispanic women on the job as police officers these days, and young and good, like major go-getters. I saw so many people that have been in my life in Vanessa's story. So, but yeah, the family lives in Houston, Texas, and that was actually celebrated once Vanessa realized that she was going to be stationed at Fort Hood, because it wasn't that far away and she could come home on weekends and really just be part of her very close family still.
Which is something that she assured her mom and family of. It's, look, I'm not going to be that far away.
Yeah.
So the narrative after what you've described shifts then to the events that occurred on April 22nd, 2020, when Vanessa was reported missing from Fort Hood. And the disappearance is sudden and completely out of character for Vanessa, who was known by her family to be constantly in contact with them via text. I mean, it was just always like a back and forth. There was just like an ongoing day by day. So they know the personality of their daughter, and immediately the family knows that something's up. And in the documentary itself, while this is not a necessarily new convention, the documentary uses graphics of the attempts at contact by text, and it's really a gut punch here. As the audience, we already know, of course, that Vanessa has come to a bad end. We already know this, right? But it absolutely does not minimize the impact as you see the text popping up and you understand just how desperate the family is so quickly. And maybe that's it, because it's so quick, and maybe because we have some information as opposed to a dramatization where it's maybe more ambiguous, I guess.
True. Yeah.
So the documentary then goes on to explore the initial response from the military, which, surprise, surprise, is startlingly non-responsive completely. Well, she's just gone. Well, you don't give a shit that she's AWOL? Like,
right.
What the fuck?
Something.
Right?
Yeah.
Something. And the family and the supporters correctly criticize the military's response as completely inadequate and slow. Then, as days go on without any significant leads, her family begins their own investigation, and they start spreading awareness on social media and organizing their own search efforts within the local community.
Yeah. Yeah. In and around, that town where Fort Hood is settled in. And Fort Hood is absolutely massive. I mean,
massive,
acres and acres and acres, but all of that is protected by the base. So really, I mean, I think as a family, you think, okay, well, we'll look in the areas we're allowed to be. But yeah, I think, when she was supposed to be off that day, but then said she got called in, and that's left to be like, did she really? Or was this someone luring her there? I think we're kind of left to wonder that. But how it shows, like you said, with those text messages, and by lunchtime, like those messages weren't even being delivered anymore. And, her fiance trying to get a hold of her, as well as her sisters. And then they turn to a couple of her friends that end up getting interviewed, Tay and CJ. And they find that her stuff is in the armory where she last was, like her keys, her wallet, everything's there except for her phone, but she's not there. And so I think this is like a press release does go out about her being missing finally. And this seems to be when, journalists and some media start picking up the story. And it's interesting because they have one female journalist in this story who's talking about, the frustrations with trying to get anything out of the military, which I understand. She's probably not going to get anything right off the bat. And this is an investigation. But then she says, CID, which is a criminal investigation division, was handling this case. And she talks about how traditionally CID is formed in the sense they send very green, very new investigators to those positions that aren't used to looking at cases like this. Right. And that just turns into a bigger shit show later on. But basically, it seems like the friends are the ones to put together that this guy, Robinson, was the last one seen with her, where she went from one armory to another one. And he was the last guy that saw Vanessa.
Yeah. So they take a break here in the documentary to start highlighting the common experiences from other female soldiers at Fort Hood, and not only female, but also male soldiers with complaints, but particularly focusing on the women because those numbers are significantly higher. And there's bits and pieces of women who share their stories of sexual harassment and assault within the military. Those accounts just really tragically and beautifully underscore these entrenched systemic issues of sexual misconduct and complete lack of accountability within the military overall that we've been going at since, 30 years ago, there was a convention where all these women were getting assaulted.
Yeah.
It's not Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook is the shooting.
Right.
But there was a convention in Florida. And you would have thought that, like, with all the attention that got years ago, we would have started to see some major change. But it's been, just baseline status quo for years and very little accountability. The issues that Vanessa's case reflected are not uncommon, but this particular case, because of the family's insistence, really brought her to the forefront.
Yeah.
And I think that the documentary uses a little bit of creative license in the narrative here by just intentionally showing at this point at the beginning just a few of the other cases. And then the big reveal, about a half an hour later, is that there's just hundreds and hundreds of these cases that have all been dismissed and ignored by the military.
Yeah. So we're going to go a little deeper into this after we, really like kind of wrap up the documentary piece. But they do talk about how Fort Hood has the highest sexual assault rate when compared to any other military base.
Right.
There have been 2 mass shootings there. One of the guys interviewed talks about how one of the sexual assault victim advocates that was at Fort Hood was essentially pimping out vulnerable females who were coming to him, maybe reporting some stuff, and then basically farming them out to people who wanted to have sex with them. I mean,
total
horrific.
sociopath.
I'm like,
total
what?
Sociopath.
I need to know more about that story. But
in fact, I paused the documentary at that point to go look that guy up.
Oh, you did?
And,
okay.
Yeah, I was just like, what a piece of shit.
Wow.
Absolutely shit.
Wow.
But thankfully, he got, he's doing prison time for his horrible actions.
Yeah. But I mean, and numerous missing and then found murdered and some suicide cases as well. But Gloria, Vanessa's mom, talks about how after Vanessa was stationed at Fort Hood, she noticed changes in her not sleeping, losing weight, talking about wanting to leave. There were times that she, there was a little bit of leakage going on. Like she was telling mom about cases of sexual assault and harassment. And her mom would ask her, is this happening to you? And she said, no. And then finally, she does admit this to her mom after, she says a supervisor or a sergeant or something like that had been sexually harassing her. And a lot of her Twitter posts around that time are like, I can't wait to get out of here. Like something, along those lines, putting in for transfers to leave, which is not covered in the documentary. But yeah, anyway, we'll definitely get into more of the issues at Fort Hood later around that. But this is around the time that her friends really start big social media awareness campaigns because Vanessa is still missing at this point. And not only that, the family and the friends start protests outside of the base demanding answers so that the military can't be silent anymore because the media has completely picked this up. So about 6 weeks into this, Vanessa's still missing. They finally get in touch with a lawyer who specializes in a lot of military policy and laws, and that's Natalia Kawam. She's really a powerhouse in this documentary and just such a wonderful, wonderful support to this family that just felt like they were nothing compared to the military. They could not get in there. And then we're like to 2 months later after Vanessa being missing, and the Army finally makes like a video kind of pleading for information for their investigation. And the family says, okay, like it's time for us to go public about the sexual harassment piece, which I think is really smart on their part. I'm sure you don't want to put all of your missing sister stuff out there, but if it's going to reinvigorate the media, like we know they get bored of something,
Yes.
then why not? And this is really the fuse that lights the fire of the hashtag I am Vanessa Guillen, because women start coming forward with their story. I'm getting like goosebumps. Coming forward with their stories, posting side by side pictures of them in their military uniforms next to Vanessa's picture. And even if they just push that hashtag, or if they do put their picture, or if they put their full story, this was women around the world saying, we have been there, we've been in her shoes, we know what happens, and it needs to stop. There has to be a better way for our women in the military. And this then leads into marches all around the world, murals of Vanessa going up all around the world. This week, I drove over to City Terrace, which is like East Los Angeles area, because I knew there was this big, beautiful mural of Vanessa Guillen, and I took some pictures of it. So if that hasn't made it to our social media yet, it certainly will by the time this episode comes out. But it was huge, absolutely huge.
So one of the things that is particularly significant about this is that I did a thorough search, and there's no evidence of any other protest of violence against a soldier not being addressed by the military. There's never been this much attention, folks. I mean, there's been some highly publicized, friendly fire deaths, and there's been war protests, but this is the first time that family and supporters have absolutely been nonstop right at the gates of Fort Hood, of a military base. So this was really, really a seminal moment in military and American history, really. So as the documentary proceeds now, it is following developments in the case, including now just the discovery of her remains, some of her remains near the Leon River in Texas, which leads to a revelation that she had been dismembered after her murder, which just adds another level of horror to this. And very quickly, the investigation ultimately reveals that Vanessa was murdered by a fellow soldier. So there's very little known about the perpetrator in this incident. And, we choose in this podcast not to focus on perpetrators. Yeah. However, I do think it's very interesting that there is not a lot of information out there. There's not been a lot of attention paid to him. I don't know if that is purposely done by the military or the media, but we know nothing about him except that he had some discipline issues there at Fort Hood, and that there's a chilling moment in the description of the complaints against him. And it's immediately linked to he hears something really pretty awful being related by another military individual, and he just chuckles and walks out of the room. Right. Like a very, very strange response. But otherwise, he's sort of an enigma.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, speaking to using his name or what have you, I'm kind of glad that we know nothing about this piece of shit, and that, the focus is elsewhere. It does feel like an enigma though, right? Because we also get very little about motive, which I think makes us all curious. And it harkens back to why was Vanessa snuffed out of this world, right? And we want to search for answers for that. And there's, some speculation, and people think that it was probably a sexual assault, where she ended up fighting back, but we don't know. But after this documentary, I'm okay with that. I mean, the family's the ones that hopefully they have the answers they wanted, or the limited amount of answers and details that they wanted. But yeah, the original part of the investigation says this is not linked to sexual assault, or they even have a press conference where they say, even if she was being sexually harassed, this seems to be totally separate from this unfortunate thing that happened to her. And they do talk about, they have her friends, the two gentlemen that I talked about before, speak about the sexual harassment, and her confiding in them that she knew if she came forward, nothing would be done. So, in hindsight, of course, they're telling a little bit more of her story.
What was your impression of them?
I thought it seemed to me it was important for them to be a part of this documentary, to be a little bit of a voice for Vanessa, but they were wildly uncomfortable with, maybe, I don't know if they're still in the military, but speaking out on this issue, being associated with the military, at least at some point. But I'm glad I heard their voices. I mean, I don't know if I have any other thoughts about them personally.
I am too.
But
I was just going to say yes, there was a level of discomfort,
almost a shyness too. I don't know how to even put it, but
they felt very sincere.
Yeah.
It felt very sincere, and I felt something. And again, when I'm saying that, I'm feeling, that my impression, which is completely subjective. And I was impressed by them because overall, I looked at them and going, these are the kind of people, the way they're presenting, these are the kind of people you would want to be in the military with. These very well-spoken, reasonable, presenting well. I don't know. I was kind of impressed by them in a way.
I know what you're saying. I think the way that I would further articulate it is, I'm glad Vanessa had these guys as friends. I'm glad she had people that she had as supporters, that she was able to open up to about this stuff. And this is I don't know if this is gonna sound crude or what, but when you're a woman in law enforcement or a woman in the military, to have guy friends that aren't just trying to get in your pants are amazing. It's like gold, right? So I felt like she had this connection with these guys, and it was important for them to be a part of this documentary to give that
right.
side.
And we don't know if they're still active military or if they were even active military at the time that this is done. So they may have been putting themselves out there. Certainly, if they were military when this is being done, it would have had to have been approved by a number of levels.
Oh, yeah.
Not saying that wouldn't happen, because the military at this point is going, oh, shit, we got to change some things. But I think that sense of trustworthiness comes across for them. And there's also something, I haven't been in that particular situation where someone is experiencing sexual assault or harassment, but I have been in a position where a coworker has been tolerating or dealing with being harassed by another coworker. And I'm lucky because I've been in agencies where that is completely not acceptable. And I've reported it, and nope, this person's a piece of shit. This is actually happening. And there's such a level of entitlement in being able to do that.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to get kicked out of the agency I work with for coming forward. In fact, we're encouraged. If you see it, you're supposed to say something, right? And that's not the way military works. I'm sure it was like really quite a psychological bind for both of them to be in. Yes,
absolutely. And, someone who does something like you have, the person on the receiving end of the harassment is, I'm sure, so grateful for that someone saw it and someone said something that is removed from the situation, because you're just like, okay, here, I'm observing it, and here's what I need to do. And then, they're probably going home every night thinking, do I report this? Do I not? But so, I thought it was interesting that actually Texas EquiSearch was the entity that came in to do the searches, and they're the ones that actually found Vanessa's remains. But was really poignant to me, and one of the most gut-wrenching scenes was, Myra, the older sister, gets the information that they found her remains, and then how she's preparing to steady herself to then tell her mom what happened. And you have them, kind of going back and forth between her saying how she told her mom and her mom how she received the news. And I just thought, these are just such amazing, amazing women. I mean, I don't know how, obviously it's their background, their upbringing, and their dedication to family that just made them be so incredibly strong in those moments. It was pretty nice to watch. So it does end up revealing that the soldier that perpetrated this crime struck Vanessa in the head with a hammer several times, killing her, and then transporting her body, but not before asking for help from his girlfriend. They refer to her as his girlfriend, who is a civilian. And so the narrative is that essentially she helped him take the remains near that river where they dismembered her, burned her remains, and then buried her in a few different places. So this is an infuriating part of the documentary, certainly, is that they talk about how the search is happening. He happens to be in military custody. I use that term very loosely because he had broken some COVID protocols, right? So this is height of 2020.
Yep.
And they don't take his phone away. He sees on his phone that they have found her remains because it's now huge news, or they have found remains, right? So he knows. He escapes from the watch of the soldier that was supposed to be watching him. And by the time they realize it, they find him walking just a few miles away. And I want to say that during this time, he was a suspect in Vanessa's murder, right? But he wasn't being held on that or charged with that. He wasn't looped into knowing that he was the one they were looking at.
And still had access to his weapons.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure if he was carrying his military issued weapons, but right. He was carrying a weapon as he's wandering down the bank of the freeway.
Yep. So he gets confronted and he pulls out his weapon and chooses to die by suicide in that moment. So regarding this incident and the fuck up of not having this person in custody for the murder and being in custody as he should be, rather than just, I don't know, I picture him kind of sitting in a chair in a room somewhere. Nobody was disciplined for this. Nobody ended up getting demoted or fired. Just the utter lack of professionalism and competence just in that piece. I'm glad they highlighted, and nobody got in trouble for this because that information certainly needed to be out there. And then the military just has this kind of mantra of, as they do in many cases, well, we took appropriate action. And it's like within the boundaries of what they have carved out for themselves and the loopholes. So they can just always say, oh, well, we took appropriate action and it is what it is. Right.
But then they don't define that.
No,
I've been in union negotiations where I'm coming in as a subject matter expert. One of the things that I have become very educated in here in Southern California is the rates at which psychologists who work for public agencies are reimbursed. And I've got stats. I've got the latest stats, and I'm using those in combination with national stats, the cost of living, all these things. And yet here I am in negotiation, and the person on the other side says, well, we're working with different data. Well, where the fuck are you getting that data, right? They just shut you down. Like it's that kind of thing. It's like, well, we are behind this wall. We get to shut it down. And that's what the military did in this particular situation. I will say there's very interesting stuff online. Again, we talked a little bit about this in Shrink Wrap, so we want to be careful about any kind of conspiracy theories or anything. But one of the family members does continue to assert that they heard 2 gunshots at the location. And one of the theories is that the military just took him out to shut all of it down.
Yeah.
They didn't want to, give him a forum. We know who it is. He's escaped. We got all the evidence. Let's just take him out. Nothing to, there's no evidence of that, but I do think it's very interesting. And I will say that the reason I'm sharing that is an illustration of we really need resolution. And his taking of his own life leaves a gaping hole in many of Vanessa's survivors, and they want meaning and they want closure. So what you do is sometimes we can displace our discomfort onto another possible unresolved issue. So I think that that's just a good explanation of how, things can go awry even in the best of circumstances. But the main thing that you're pointing out, which is a big deal, is that there was I don't know if like was somebody watching him, was he in a room, or were they like, okay, you're in custody, but there's no locked doors, you're
Who
not in the
knows?
brig.
Yeah.
So, but we don't know that now.
I don't know. But yeah, I think that lack of resolution of knowing more with the way that, with him dying is really what also fuels this next part, right? Because the documentary, they do show a little bit of Vanessa's funeral, and Houston chief of police at the time, Art Acevedo, is there, very close to the family. I like him a lot for a lot of reasons, but I've also heard some other stuff that I don't like too much about him. But he's been a very strong supporter of the military and speaking out about violence against women, and supporter of his law enforcement agencies he's worked for. So it was interesting to see him there. But so the documentary shifts to commentary on her legacy, but as well as the calls for justice and reform within the military, and very particularly at Fort Hood. So it turns in highlighting really the family's next chapter and their advocacy efforts, including their push for legislation, which originally starts off as the I Am Vanessa Guillen Act, which is essentially aiming to improve reporting and response procedures for sexual harassment and assault in the military. So the family really at this point is teamed up with the attorney, and they go to DC, and she gets them a meeting with President Trump, which I'll refrain a ton of sidebar comments for this. It was strange to see them sitting there pleading with a man as Mexican Americans, talking about their sister who was sexually assaulted and murdered. And
I don't even think we need to. I'm right there with you, and it kind of speaks for itself. Yeah, it was.
Just want to acknowledge.
It was the height of irony.
It was the height of irony. That beautiful. And then right afterwards, they hold a rally outside the White House where Lupe, the 16-year-old sister, speaks, and she has just come into her own with this. What a powerful young woman that talks about the issue of chain of command being the be all end all oversight in the military. But she's just amazing in honoring her sister and being really fiery about the work that they still have yet to do. They do give a little bit of time to talk about the trial for the female accomplice. There's one proceeding that comes up where they were doing a hearing where they were going to essentially toss out possibly her confession, and the family attends that. It turned out not happening, thank goodness. And as of our recording, she has not gone to trial yet, so that's still up in the air. But finally, the family feels like they get a little bit of acknowledgement, because an official report does actually come out verifying that Vanessa was in fact sexually harassed. It was determined that 2 separate supervisors had harassed her, and one was still working there at the time that this documentary came out, but it did not acknowledge that Robinson was a person who had harassed her. So we still don't get that piece of the puzzle put together there. So some time goes by. After this report comes out, there is now a change in the presidency. So basically, the family learns that there's another bill that is trying to be introduced, and they don't want these competing bills between the House and the Senate. So what they do is they decide to team up. That bill is actually a little bit more broad, where it's looking at all misdemeanors will not have the military chain of command as the end all be all, that there shall be an independent evaluator, prosecutor, investigator to be able to look at anything, including misdemeanor sexual assault. So they decide under President Biden to then start introducing this and working with the senators and the representatives to get a little bit more backing on that bill. And they do end up putting Vanessa's name on it, and it gets passed, which is a really lovely part to this documentary to see that.
It's also a really great illustration of how politics work.
Yeah, it is.
It's this give and take between hopefully lawmakers that cooperate with each other, which used to happen all the time. And I will say, because I wasn't aware in watching this if it had actually passed, to see that something was completed is very satisfying.
Yep.
But you're kind of on the edge of your seat of, oh my gosh, did this get dropped? What happened? So I think it's this whole documentary is really a very sincere acknowledgement of Vanessa's life. And it should be an inspiration for us as a community and the military to really look and address these deep-seated problems that led to her ultimately senseless death. It shines a light on perseverance and resilience in her family members. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there's just has to be an unwavering commitment to fighting for justice and making a real difference in honor of her memory. I will say, I want to acknowledge something and be very clear about this, though, that the unfolding and the resolution of the crime itself happened relatively quickly.
Yeah.
As compared to some other cases where we've covered, if you're in the true crime community, you've seen countless examples of these, where the investigation just goes on and on and on, and the family members are worn down to nubs. I mean, it's just horrible how it impacts the family. So
yeah.
I'm really happy that this is an example of action being taken relatively quickly, and maybe only because Texas Equus, stepped in and conducted the search in the way that they did.
Well, and I think, we want to differentiate quickly. Yes, after her remains were found, certainly. And part of that is because he took his own life. So there was nothing left to do.
Exactly.
But the missing piece, like when she went missing, was bullshit. Like that,
Absolutely.
She was like, there was such a tight timeline of when she stopped communicating and this guy had to get off base with her body, right? Like
somebody witnessed him struggling with a big box, like a big Tupperware crate or something that he was shoving in the back of a car.
Yeah. So that piece was way, way, way too long, and I'm sure felt even longer to the family. But yeah, they kind of tell us at the end of the documentary that the Guillen family has filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Army, so that's pending, and that the Army still maintains that the murder and the sexual assaults were totally unrelated. Again, the people in the documentary hypothesize that is like something they just want to keep separate, right? Like this is a big problem. This case was a big problem. Let's not marry these two things together. So let's talk about the issues at Fort Hood.
At Fort Hood, absolutely.
Oh my gosh. I think of my friends that are in the Army and other friends whose daughter's about to graduate from West Point. And I'm like, please don't let any of them get stationed at Fort Hood. So in recent years, Fort Hood, which I mentioned is one of the largest military installations in the United States, has been plagued by a series of problems that have garnered national attention and raised concerns about the military's handling of such issues, particularly sexual harassment, assault, and violence. After Vanessa's murder, an independent review committee released a 136-page report detailing the problems that have plagued Fort Hood, including the shortcomings of the investigation into Vanessa's disappearance and the subsequent murder investigation. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to this report if you want to read it. Or if you want a really good detailed summary, please go listen to our friend Mama Margot, who breaks it down for you in an episode titled Fort Hood Review, Vanessa Guillen, that was released on January 4th, 2021. And that is on her incredible podcast, Military Murder. She read the whole thing, gives you the highlights, but the highlights in detail. But essentially, the report acknowledged years of high crime and violence on Fort Hood property as compared to other bases. And it highlighted the ineptness of the Criminal Investigations Division. And they handle major crimes on the base. And basically, this report stated that the investigators assigned to such cases were not trained or experienced enough to handle something like a missing person, a murdered person, violent attacks, etc., that they conducted very surface level investigations and that they did not have the resources to conduct forensic aspects of the investigations. So this report really lays it out, as the journalist had talked about in the documentary, how inept they were. They're saying, yeah, they're not trained well. These people should not be doing these investigations, but they're also not supported well. And they just basically checked some boxes. Like, they go into detail about how horrible and surface level the interviews were that they did in Vanessa's case. Like, just basic questions. going in there, not digging deep at all.
So here are some of the major categories where Fort Hood has been just shown to be an unsafe and quite toxic environment for our servicemen and servicewomen. Number one is just completely kind of gobsmacking. It's the significantly high rates of crime and violence. Fort Hood has had a high number of violent incidents that include homicides, suicides, and cases of domestic violence. And it's clear that these incidents have raised a lot of questions about the safety and security of service members and their families on the base. Not to mention, Fort Hood has experienced 2 mass shootings on base that have been perpetrated by soldiers. And that is not a good look at all. Like the fact that there were 2, that there was one and there wasn't a complete and utter shift of all protocol to prevent that. Another one happening is just wild. In 2009, there was an incredibly disturbing situation in which an Army psychiatrist, we don't name mass shooters, that psychiatrist shot and killed 13 people on the base and wounded 32 others. It's very significant and has come out in the study of this individual about his own mental health history, which was known despite the fact that he was allowed to be a military psychiatrist. This was a calculated terrorist act that was driven by that shooter's ideological beliefs, that soldiers were being ordered to kill unarmed civilians in Iraq and Afghanistan. The attack itself resulted in the death of 13 people on the base and wounded 32 others. In open court, the psychiatrist admitted that the evidence would show he was the shooter, and he went on to say, "We, the Mujahideen, are imperfect Muslims trying to establish a perfect religion in the land of the supreme God. I apologize for any mistakes I made in this endeavor." Very, very narcissistic displacement of responsibility.
That was so shocking when that happened.
Yeah, it was a big deal because you thought it was anybody else. And when it was revealed that it was a psychiatrist, and clearly the mental health issues are driving the doctrine and the belief systems. That was an excuse. That was, but clearly this is a disturbed individual. And they, the more you read into this case is that he had been written up numbers of times for being completely inappropriate and irritable
and
insubordinate. Yeah. Just a rager, like a real rager.
Yeah.
And then in 2014, a 34-year-old Army specialist went on a shooting spree at Fort Hood. And this incident happened after he had a verbal altercation with his superior officers who denied a request for his time off. He killed and wounded officers in the administrative buildings and then drove to another part of the base where he worked, there opening fire and killing a soldier who walked up to him and attempted to talk him down. He continued in his car, essentially doing drive-by style shootings at other soldiers and vehicles, and he got into a gunfight with a military police officer and then died by taking his own life.
So then, of course, another point here is we've talked extensively about already is the sexual harassment and assault incidents at Fort Hood, which, of course, it has faced now widespread criticism for the handling of these types of cases. There have been reports of widespread harassment and a lack of accountability for perpetrators for years. The case of Vanessa Guillen certainly brought national attention to these issues. And in that independent report that was released, they talked about the SHARP program. So the SHARP program was the Sexual Harassment, Assault, Response, and Prevention program within I don't know if it's just the Army or if that is to other branches as well. But essentially they found, and that program is still listed on the Army's website. So hopefully it has been revamped and redone, and their efforts into prevention and response have been really streamlined, and people have taken training to then trust the program. Because I think that's the problem here is that you have this that wasn't taken seriously. You have all these programs in place with these neat, acronyms and what have you. But if they're all laughable and bullshit, and then something happens like it did to Vanessa, and you get all this overhaul that needs to happen and come out of it, how do you get people to trust those programs? That's really the key. So I certainly hope that has been done, or they're working on that cultural change to be able to shift into folks coming forward. The active bystandership issues that we're talking about other people seeing people do bad things and coming forward or talking to them, and then the appropriate responses happening. So I think I didn't find anything where they said, okay, we have now examined the new program and it's running well or like it should. Honestly, I don't know if we'll ever see anything like that, but I certainly hope those efforts are being made.
So in addition to these last few points, there's also the very significantly high number of missing person cases out of Fort Hood. That location has a number of high profile cases involving missing soldiers, including Vanessa Guillen and Gregory Morales. These cases have raised questions about the military's procedures for responding to missing persons reports and protecting their service members. A lack of immediate action leads the door open to a lot of things that could happen, right? And interestingly enough, and I admire anyone who makes a commitment to military service, because most people know going in that you are now military. You are now an agent of the government. You are actually giving up some of your rights because they tell you when to stand, when to jump, and how high to jump. That's just part of the deal. You sign up for that. So it seems very, very odd that there would be this sort of laissez-faire attitude about missing persons.
Right.
This next part I'm going to do is this 2023 about Elder Fernandez. So one of the examples of a missing person that sadly ended tragically is the story of Elder Fernandez. Fernandez was reported missing on August 18th, 2020, and he was last seen by members of his unit in Killeen, Texas on August 17th, the day before. His disappearance sparked a quite thorough search in Central Texas, mainly because it's so close to Vanessa's disappearance. And they're like, oh, we got to get on top of this.
Mm-hmm.
And his family members traveled from Massachusetts to help look for him. Fernandez had previously transferred units after himself reporting sexual abuse, and an investigation into the allegation remained open following his disappearance. So Elder Fernandez's body was found a little over a week later near Lake Polk in Temple, Texas, which is about 30 miles from Fort Hood. The news was first announced by the family's attorney, Natalie Kawam, from the Vanessa Guillen documentary, and later confirmed by Fort Hood. Unfortunately, his body was found hanging in a tree, and police said that there was no indication of foul play. Quaham later stated that Fernandez was, at the time, the 13th Fort Hood soldier to have vanished or been killed in 2020. 13 people in 2020 alone.
Yeah. And that was only in August.
Right.
That was, yeah. So some other things we're not going to go too in depth about, but certainly has been a problem at Fort Hood. There have been reports of racial tensions and discrimination at Fort Hood, including allegations of unequal treatment and disparities in discipline. And these issues have highlighted broader concerns, really just about racism and bias within the military. And then there's the inadequate support services that have been available. Some service members and their families have reported highly inadequate services available at Fort Hood, including limited access to mental health care, counseling, as well as situations talking about housing and what's available to them and the shoddy conditions. Again, if you go back and listen to some of Mama Margot's episodes about Fort Hood, she talks about not necessarily Fort Hood, but like her search when she and her husband had moved base to base with their family, what was offered, the mold in some of this base housing, just some deplorable conditions. And these shortcomings have raised concerns about the well-being of service members and their ability to cope with the stresses of military life. I mean, just the basics of being able to care for your family. And then above and beyond that, if you don't have good access and support in terms of mental health care, what are we doing?
Well, it's also frustrating knowing how much of our government budget is designated to military issues. And there's just no excuse that we know how many billions of dollars are directed to the military, but it goes through, trickle down through all these different personalities and agencies and powers within military. But your soldiers are being exposed to black mold. Right. Your soldiers don't have adequate mental health services. Come on, that's just doesn't make sense at all.
It's like what I say in law enforcement all the time. Think about how much better we could be if everyone was functioning at a level where, they were able to just get some skills on how to build their bandwidth and,
Absolutely.
had a little bit of sleep hygiene assessment done. So, it actually lowers things like use of force incidents. And it just, there's nothing wrong with channeling money into wellness for sure. The problems at Fort Hood reflect broader issues within the military, including a culture that has for generations tolerated misconduct, a lack of accountability for leaders, and a failure to adequately support service members. Multiple efforts to address these problems have included reforms to the military justice system, increased support for victims of harassment and assault, and efforts to improve leadership training and accountability, but has been very slow going. And all we can do is continue to bring light to these cases and demand change.
Yeah. So, taking a little bit of a more of a turn in a regular documentary episode, I want to focus a little bit on psych issues, probably more so than we do in other documentaries. But there are some interesting things that popped up for me in watching this. And one of them is a study out of Harvard that really sort of focuses on the phenomenon of homicide followed by suicide of the perpetrator, and particularly in cases involving intimate partners. And in their analyzing of data from the Kentucky Firearm Injury Statistics Program that was between 1998 and 2000, that study revealed significantly alarming patterns that we have covered in other episodes. While firearm homicides followed by suicide accounted for less than 7% of all cases, a staggering 2/3 of instances where a woman was shot by an intimate partner then ended with the perpetrator taking their own life using the same firearm. So interestingly, many of these female victims had minimal interactions with the community-based services that may have been available to them. Analysis goes on across multiple states, echoing these findings, and a significant 59% of men who committed this terrible act of killing their female intimate partner with a firearm did end their own lives. So this study goes on to highlight the role of firearm accessibility in the US as compared to other countries in a relatively comparative study involving the Netherlands, Switzerland, and the US, utilizing data from the National Violent Death Reporting System, another acronym NVDRS, underscores some pretty stark differences. And notably, countries with greater firearm availability, like Switzerland and the United States, of course, exhibit markedly higher rates of homicide followed by suicide compared to the Netherlands. So this correlation between firearm accessibility and the prevalence of these kinds of events really illuminates an urgent need for comprehensive and smart firearm regulation, as well as mental health support initiatives.
Yeah, thank you for that. So some people believe that narcissists, we mentioned narcissism earlier, hardly ever attempt suicide, and that when they do, it's usually a way to manipulate others. However, research suggests otherwise. Studies from different sources, such as Stone in 1989, Links et al. In 2003, and Heisel et al. In 2007, just to name a few, have all found connections between NPD and suicidal behavior. For instance, a study tracking patients over 15 years in a New York psychiatric hospital discovered that those with NPD or narcissistic traits were more likely to die from suicide compared to those without such traits. Another study noted that older adults with depression and narcissistic traits faced a higher risk of suicide. It's been observed that individuals with NPD might even be at risk of suicide when they're not going through a depressive episode. This could be because their self-esteem is fragile, and they might see suicide as a way to cope with perceived damage to their self-worth. Basically, they see it as an option. They see it as a way out, like people with suicidal ideation do. But various reasons have been suggested for why someone with NPD might attempt suicide, including trying to regain a sense of control, protect themselves from perceived threats, or even to seek revenge, or maybe falsely believing they're invincible. And we've also seen this as well, where they're aiming to eliminate their quote unquote flawed self. That's some deep stuff.
It really is, because it harkens back to that understanding that we have that there's not only a genetic predisposition to personality disorders, but that for all of the grandiosity and bloviating examples of presentation of narcissist, it's covering up an unbelievably toxic view of the self that is very, very highly defended. In a case like this, and Vanessa's perpetrator, it feels like really a fuck you, is I'm going to take myself out and you're not going to have any control over me. Or also maybe just okay, the control has been taken away from me. I'm not going to live like this. I'm not going to live not being in control. So just as a little review, narcissistic personality disorder is characterized by feelings of being overly important, desiring, craving admiration, all coupled with a lack of empathy and the inability to sort of put themselves in another person's place or understand what another person might be feeling. Traits start to show up in early adulthood and maybe a little bit earlier in different situations. The DSM also mentions that individuals with narcissistic personality disorder might very well feel deep shame or humiliation, which could lead to withdrawal from social situations, an increase in affective issues such as sadness and ongoing depression. And that can present as dysthymia or major depressive disorder. So yes, even people with a grandiose sense of self can actually have mood disorders within their overarching personality disorder. But on the flip side, they might also go through periods of feeling excessively great, which could be linked to a hypomanic mood disorder as well. So just remembering that it's so important to understand that NPD can often coexist with other personality disorders or traits of other personality disorders like borderline or antisocial, and that can further increase the risk of suicidal behaviors. NPD is not very common in the general population, thankfully, although on social media, you would think that it's just rampant all over the world.
We need a new category for that.
But studying suicidal tendencies in individuals that have been diagnosed or exhibit a number of characteristics of NPD could be really crucial for acknowledging and developing suicide prevention strategies for us in mental health.
Sure, absolutely. So I just want to direct you guys back to Mama Margot's podcast, Military Murder. She does cover a number of crimes out of Fort Hood. And I went back and listened to her series on Vanessa when this was happening in real time, which is a little surreal to do that. But she also has episodes on the murder of Ryan Sullivan, the spree killing soldier Dwight Loving, the murder of Diane Hood, and the murder of Frank Schreiber. And then, of course, the disappearance of Elder Fernandez. So those are the titles of her episodes if you want to go look at those. But I guess we should get into our review, our brain rating here.
Yeah, I really liked it. It was moving. It left me with a sense of hope that sometimes these things work out and sometimes actions are taken. Let's see what happens with the combined laws that are now existing regarding sexual assault allegations within the military. Again, it leads the audience through all these challenges in the investigation, but I still have this emotional reaction of, but why does legislation take so long? Even though they spell out, the frustrations and the deals. And, there are progressive liberal entities that are involved in trying to move the case forward. There are some very, very conservative people that are interviewed that at least appear to be supportive of the legislation as well. But again, one of the most striking things in the documentary that I was stunned by, because it's presented so well by one of the interviewees, is all of the levels of dilution of responsibility in trying to address cases like this. And he goes through explaining that it's not just that you report it to your supervisor. They investigate it and they decide whether it's going to go further. And then it goes up another step. And that individual, who is now 4 steps emotionally removed from this, gets to decide whether or not it's going to go forward. And if they bump it up the next level, then a person who's even further removed is making a decision. And if they bump it up, there's another person who is even further removed and probably has much more of an investment in maintaining their position in the military rather than stirring shit up. And I wish that there was more attention paid to that particular issue, but I thought it was excellent. I'm going to give it 5 brains, and partially because it's just so wrong that this victim, that Vanessa, was wronged in this way.
Yeah, I put down, I'm going to give it 4.5 brains. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was moving for such a tragedy, a dark tragedy. It does give you hope at the end of it. Didn't feel exploitative to anyone who participated in it. It was just incredibly, incredibly moving. And again, another story that needed to be told. I don't have anything bad to say about it. This is probably the first true crime documentary that made me tear up. So I always give high points to forms of entertainment, which this does fall into, that make me cry. So
anything that can put a spark of warmth in your cold, dead heart, right?
Yes. So yeah, I'm going to go with 4.5 brains here. Everything you said, I completely echo, but I think we made our thoughts known during this. So glad we did this one for sure.
Yeah. So wrapping up for today, folks, again, thanks for being a listener. We are taking a break, a much deserved break for both of us. The last 2 years has been a really fascinating, wild ride of generating weekly content. And Dr. Shiloh and I have come to the decision that we need to take a step back. We're not leaving. We're not going anywhere. Nope. Don't worry about that. But we are taking 6 weeks off so that we can rest and travel and regroup and not even take action on other projects, but think about taking action. What is that in the stages of change model? We're thinking about action.
We're in
the planning. We're at contemplation, right? Yes. We're not into planning. We're in contemplation.
Yeah. And we're going to take some time to also obviously think about what we want with LA Not So Confidential next. So like time to revamp and upgrade some experiences for you guys. That includes the live streams, expanding content on Patreon, live events, kind of map out what we want to do, and as well as what can we do that's brand new. So in that, we have to make space somewhere. So we will be going back to 2 episodes a month when we come back in, that's going to be mid-May, right? So yeah, let us know. We want to know your input. Would you rather have us go back to the 2 real forensic heavy type shows in a month? Do you want us to alternate it? Are you enjoying the vintage stuff? Are you enjoying the documentary reviews? Let us know. We really take that to heart. And when we do, whatever gets left out, because we can't shove it all back in there, right? Of course, every once in a while, we'll do something special on Patreon as far as like maybe a vintage episode here and there.
And I did want to add to what you're saying that this revamping and reconsideration, where we are contemplating is making space so that we actually have time to create more Patreon content for our members. We just want that to be a continually valuable experience, and going from 4 episodes a month will allow us to do that, to offer some things that go deeper into the work that we do and also expand out of it in ways that we think would be value added content. So it's pretty exciting. But yes, please let us know.
You're not done with us yet this month. So don't forget the 30th, we have our live stream with Steve Kubine and his co-host Nan from the podcast From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. So we'll certainly see you guys then. Join us live, please, on YouTube.
Yes. All right, folks, thanks so much. We will see you next time on LA
Not So
Confidential. Bye, folks.
Bye, guys. We sincerely thank you for spending some time with us today. LA Not So Confidential is part of the Crawl Space Media Network in partnership with Glassbox Media. Each episode is hosted, produced, and written by Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh. Our post-production editing and sweetening magic is handled by the multi-talented Jason Usry of Ear Cult Productions.
The LA Not So Confidential theme, entitled Cool Vibes Film Noir, is composed and performed by the talented Kevin MacLeod. He graciously allows us to use his music via a Creative Commons Attribution license, and you can check out all of Kevin's amazing work on YouTube.
All of the resources for each episode can be found on our website at la-not-so-confidential.com. You can find us on Instagram at LA Not So Podcast, on Twitter at LA Not So Pod, and on Facebook at LA Not So Confidential. Media inquiries and bookings are scheduled at alienistentertainment@gmail.com.
Please join us each month on Saturdays at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for a live streaming and very interactive broadcast on YouTube entitled Behind the Couch. Stay tuned to all of our social media for our live streaming scheduling announcements.
Subscribe to LA Not So Confidential so you never miss a new episode. And lastly, we'd be honored if you joined our Patreon at patreon.com/LA Not So Podcast. With a subscription, you get an ad-free listening experience, and you'll be the first notified about upcoming live events, social gatherings, and super cool swag coming your way.
Thanks for listening, and join in with us next time on LA
Not So
Confidential. Bye, folks.